Welcome to class PM. The previous lesson we have learned about force and pressure, and we have learned how force can change the shape of an object, and we have also changed the direction of an object, right? So we have seen many things, and at the same time we have learned a lot many things about pressure, and we have come across different types of forces, like where we have studied about contact forces and non-contact forces. So one among those contact force which we have learned, if you remember, it's friction, right? So you might be wondering, like, once the chapter is done of force and pressure, what is that I'm talking about friction again, right? This chapter you are going to learn about friction. So let us start our next chapter, friction. So this friction, you all know what friction is. If you remember from the points which we have learned, if you can recall from the points which we have learned from the frictional force, we have learned that this frictional force is considered to be a contact force as the two objects or the two surfaces come in contact with each other. We have learned that this frictional force is considered to be a contact force. That is because the two surfaces which are present, they come in contact with each other. Say like, if I have to slide down a pencil from a slide, right? You know, the playing slide. See, most of us slide down through a slide. But if I have to slide down some other object from the playing slide, what do? You see that there is a friction, there is a contact between the surface of an object and the other surface of an object. See, let me say that if I have to roll down a ball from the slide, right? When you go to generally water parks, you see there are water slides where you see most of the people rolling the balls on the slide and you people slide down. So when you slide down, the surface of your body comes in contact with the surface of the slide. That means, are they not in contact to each other? That's the reason this is said to be a frictional force, right? That force is said to be a frictional force. And when you talk about this friction, many a times you might have observed your dad while driving a car applying brakes at the signals, right? And why do you have to apply brake at the signal? Say like if you are crossing the red signal, right, what happens? Definitely, you know that the policemen or the CC cams which are present, they capture the moment, right? It is not the happiest moment to be captured. Instead, you'll be given a challan, right? So, is that because you get a challan, that's the reason you apply a brake? Or is that the reason you slow down? No. See, when you slow down, what is that making you to slow down? It is not this materialistic reason, but the reason behind slowing down the vehicle, when you see there is some obstruction coming in the path, like say signal or some animal. Suddenly in India we see many animals come onto the road, like buffaloes, cows, goats and everything, right? So you can't go hitting them, right? So you have to slow down. When you slow down, you see that the car will slow down the speed. How come? Because there is a friction created between the surface of the car wheel and the road. That's the reason you're able to slow down the car. You might have seen this. And you might have seen a ball rolling on a floor. When you just roll down the ball onto the floor, it goes and stops after a certain while. Why is this? How come? See, you haven't touched anything. You have not touched it after rolling it onto the floor. At the same time, you don't run behind it to stop it. Or at the same time, there is no obstruction in its path so that it can stop it. But even then, it stops. That is because of the frictional force. That is because of the friction between the two surfaces. Friction between two surfaces. So these are the various examples which you come across every day. At the same time, you might have seen many things which stop by themselves even though there is no force applied, right? That is because of the friction between the two surfaces. So you know that there is a friction acting between the two surfaces which will make the moving object stop, right? So to understand this friction better, let us do a small activity and find out how come this frictional force will make an object stop its motion, right? So for this activity, you just need to take a table, right? Assume that this is a table. Now what you do is come to the other end of the table, right? Come to one end of the table, place a notebook on it and try to push it. And when you try to push it, this will move to only a certain extent. Why? Why is that happening? Now, okay, you have tried it from this end. Now go to the other end, right? And try it again. Try to push the book with your hand. And what do you observe again? you observe that when you push this book from the other end of the table, it moves to a little distance and stops. Now, what is that it is making the book stop? Is that you're keeping your hand, or is that do you have any obstruction in its path, or is there some magic happening so that the book stops, or is someone instructing the book to stop? Say like, hey book, stop, will it? No. So now what is that it is making to stop? It is nothing but the friction. Now you might have observed there is a contact between the surface of the book and the table surface, right? So these two surfaces are coming in contact with each other, where you can see there is a friction developed or a friction produced, due to which the motion of the book is opposed or the motion of the book is stopped. Now when we talk about this motion of the book, when you apply a force on the book from the left side, the direction of friction will be in the opposite direction. That means it will be from the right. So like, say this is the book, right? When you have applied the force this way from the right, the direction of the friction will be towards the left. That means these two are opposing forces. These two are opposing forces. And when you apply a force from the right side, the friction will be from the left. And when you apply the force from left side, the friction will be from the right side. So what did you understand? You have seen that in both the cases, say like this is the book, okay, if the force is applied is in the direction of right side, then the friction acting on it or applied will be towards the left. If this is towards the right, this will be towards the left, In the same case, if the force applied is from the left, then the friction will be from the right. Friction applied will be from the left. See, this is case 1, right? This is case 2. So, according to your activity, you try to push the book from one end of the table, that is from one side of the table, where you have applied force from the right side, right? But the friction acting is from the left direction. That means the direction of the friction is always opposite to the direction of the force applied. In the same way, in the second case, you have changed, you have come to the other end of the table and try to apply force on the book from the left side. So when a force is applied from the left side, you see that the friction acting will be from the right side. So in both these cases, you have observed that the friction is opposing the motion of the book. It is opposing means what? Trying to stop. Opposing the motion of the book. You can see that the friction which is acting over here is opposing the motion of the book. That means you have understood that always whenever there is a force applied, the friction acts in the opposite direction of the applied force. Okay, so the force of friction always acts opposite or always opposes the applied force, Now you might have a question, what is applied force? It is nothing but the force which is applied. So when you're trying to push, when you're trying to apply some force, this will be always opposed by opposite direction of frictional force, That is how you could see that the objects come to rest after a certain distance they have traveled. If not, definitely there would not have been a rest or a stationary motion for the object. Now, when we talk about this friction, now let us learn what are the factors which are affecting friction. See, there are many reasons which could affect the frictional force. Now let us learn about the factors which affect friction. So when you talk about factors affecting friction, so you might be wondering, like, what are those factors which are affecting the rate of friction? So by now it is clear that the frictional force is a force which will oppose the applied force. That means when you are applying a force on an object, the frictional force will move in the opposite direction and try to oppose the motion of this object. Say like this is object, like assume that my hand is a object and I'm trying to move it this way, and the frictional force will act in the opposite direction and it will try to stop the movement of this object. So such forces are said to be frictional forces. Now let us understand what are these factors which are opposing or affecting this frictional force. So before I start up with this frictional force, factors affecting the frictional force, I just wanted to talk about a small activity or an experiment which will make you understand better about these factors, right? So all of you might have seen spring balance. All of you might have seen spring balance. We know that there are different balances used in the market, right, to measure various commodities. When you go to a grocery shop, you see a pan balance, right, where they put all the vegetables, fruits and everything. And what do? They see the needle so that there is a proper balance of the weight on either pans, and then they give you. At the same time, you know there is a common balance, right? You know there is a physical balance, right, in which is used in the laboratories. At the same time, there are digital balances nowadays which are used by many of the supermarket people. Right, there are so many varieties of balance. The spring balance is one of those balances which will help us to measure the weight of small objects. It has a graduation in the sense marking, scale marking, so that we can know like what is the weight of an object. So now you know what is spring balance. Now let us start up with our activity. Take a brick, you know brick, right? So take a nice brick, okay, of nice rectangular sized brick. Now tie the brick with a string. In the center, you just tie a string to the brick and attach the string to the spring balance. Now what you do is, so when you try to pull the brick using a spring balance, when initially the brick starts moving, definitely you'll note a measurement, right? So that measurement will give you the force of friction applied. Now repeat the same activity, okay, repeat the same thing by using a polythene, by wrap this brick in a polythene cover, and now try to pull it. Definitely that will also give you a reading. Now out of these two readings, what do you conclude? Which one will make the brick move smoothly or easy? Yes, definitely the one which is wrapped in a polythene cover will help in smooth movement of the brick. Now by now you might have understood like what is the factor which affects the friction, that is the smoothness of a surface. So when the surface is smooth, you see that there is a frictional force, frictional force. So when the surface is smooth, definitely there will be a frictional force seen between the two surfaces. At the same time, let us also try with some other activity. Now take a small table, all right, arrange a plank on the table. Take a small wooden piece or some tile and arrange it as a plank on a table. Now try to roll down the pencil on a plank of a table. From the plank of the table, when you roll down the pencil, you see that the pencil rolls to certain distance on the table, right? Now repeat the experiment by placing a cloth on the table, and now you roll down the pencil onto this cloth again, right? And now see the difference, like in which case the pencil rolls to a farther distance. Now you might have understood the surface of the table seems to be very smooth. Though it is very smooth, you see that there are some small irregularities which cannot be sighted with our eye. So these irregularities which are present, what do? They lock into each other, and which will make the pencil to slide over, or it could be any object to slide over. That is the reason. That means interlocking of these two surfaces or irregularities will help in movement of the object to a certain distance. So to overcome this irregularities, you have to apply a force. So smoother surface, friction is less. On irregular surface, greater. So when you look at this, see, I told you smoothness is, or the smoothness of the surface is one of the factor. So when I told you, we have seen that you have placed a table where you have arranged a plank on the table on one corner, and you have tried to slide down the pencil. So when you try to slide down the pencil, you see that the pencil travels to a certain distance and stops at a particular point, right? At the same time, when you cover this smooth surface of the table using a cloth and try to slide down the pencil again, you see that this will travel to a certain distance and stop. So for this, what you have to do, when there is an irregular surface, the friction will be greater. That means you need to apply a lot of force. And when the surface is smooth, a little force can also make the things move, make the things move. See, that's the reason you see that friction is less in case of smoother surface and friction is greater in case of irregular surface. As I've told you, though the table looks to be very smooth, there are some irregularities present. So these irregularities which are present, they try to lock the surface or lock the things between the two surfaces. So to overcome this interlocking, we have to apply force. So a force to be applied. So when you apply such forces, you see that the objects move to a little distance. So when in case of smoother surface, it is less, and in case of rough surface, it is greater, right? The friction is great. So that is the reason you might have observed many a times, even a small drop of water on a smooth tile will make you slip off to a greater distance, right? But when you have water drop on a concrete surface, say like you CC roads in the street, will you slip and fall off? No, you don't slip and fall. Right? Now you might have understood the difference, right? The smooth surfaces will definitely have less friction. That is the reason we slip off. That is the reason during rainy season, many of the people who travel using two-wheelers, they skid off and fall. Why? Because during a rainy season, the roads are wet. The roads are wet, and when the road surface is smooth and the bike tires are smooth, when the threading of the tire is say like lost, so what happens? There is no friction created between this road and the tire. That makes the person skid off the bike and fall and meet with an accident. So now you might have understood the smoother surfaces will have less friction, whereas the concrete or like say irregular surfaces can have greater friction. So when it is smooth, it can slip off nicely. That's the reason you slip when the surface is smooth. When there are like obstacles, say like disturbances in the path, definitely you won't skip because you try to walk. When you're asked to walk on a sand on a smooth surface, on which surface you will try to slip? No, there is a chance of slipping. Definitely when it is a smooth surface, there is a chance of slipping. But on a path of sand, you will never slip because the small pebbles or small stones which are present, they are of irregular size and shape. So these irregularities, what do? They lock the surface of your foot to the surface of the sand. That's the reason there is no chance of skipping and falling, right? So now by now you might have understood that this is the factor which is actually affecting the friction. And see, sometimes we generally try to arrange things in our house nicely, and sometimes we feel that no, this table should come to the other end, and my table lamp has to go to this end, and my bed has to be moved to the some other place, right? Definitely we'll have all these things because we usually get bored of daily routine, right? We don't like the same things, same furniture in our room, right? So we feel like we get rejuvenated when we look at the atmosphere in a different way. So you can be very creative. You can arrange your room by yourselves. So when you try to move desks from one end to the other end, what do? It is simply like you say, hey, desk, get up and go and sit there. Will it go and sit at a corner? No, definitely not. It won't sit because it doesn't understand. It has no brain like human. It's a non-living thing. What is that you are supposed to do? You are supposed to move the desk from one corner of your room to the other corner by pushing it, right? And which is the case when you feel to push the desk? Which is the case, in which case you feel to push the desk? Which case you feel harder to push the desk? Definitely when the desk is at rest, that means when it is in one position, when you try to move, definitely you will feel it is to be a little harder because you need to apply a lot of force and the friction will be always acting in the opposite direction. So that is the reason you will definitely feel difficult to get the table or the desk in your room onto motion, right? And it would be definitely easy to join the person who is already moving the table or dragging the table to the other corner. So it will be easy to move or drag the table which is already in the motion. So that will be easier. See, when something is moving, you just need to apply little force so that you can push it aside. But when it is at rest, that needs more of your effort or more of the force to be applied so that you can move it from one position to the other position. So in such cases, you all might have experienced all these things. I'm not teaching anything new. This is all of your real-time experiences, right? If you haven't experienced, just get into your room and try it out. Definitely you'll understand what is happening with you and your desk and how come friction opposes the motion of the applied force, right? So the force which is required to overcome the friction at the instant the object starts moving is said to be static friction. So when you talk about this static friction, what do you mean by static? Static means which is not in motion, like say like stationary. So the measure of static friction is nothing but the force required to overcome the friction at the instant an object starts moving from the rest. Say like at the moment, the spot or the time at which, or you can say the instant at which the object starts moving. So the force which is applied at the time of its movement is said to be the measure of static friction. And why is this force applied? To what is to be done? To overcome the frictional force. So such a force is said to be static friction. There is another friction also called sliding friction. Okay. So when you talk about the sliding friction is nothing but the force which is required. See, I've gave you an example, like which case you would feel easier to move the desk from one side of the room to the other side. Definitely, you would feel easier to join the force or to apply the force when the object is moving, right? So, that is more easier than applying a force on a stationary object. So, in case of sliding friction, the force which is required to keep the object to move with the same speed throughout is said to be sliding friction. Say like, so many times we might have played games like when a child is sitting on a mat and you try to drag the child along with the mat. Which case is easier? Trying to drag the child sitting on a mat is easier, or trying to drag the child who is sitting on a floor is easier? You will definitely know the differences, right? So, this force which is actually required to keep the object to move with the same speed is said to be sliding friction. So, by now you might have understood like what are the different factors. It is only one thing, the surface of the object or the smoothness of the surface is one of the important factor which will affect the friction, So, this will help you to understand better of friction. Now, if you want to try, you can just try many things which are related to the friction at home, right? Now, we know that friction is important, right? You can say that it is a necessary evil. You would have seen like in olden days, they never had refrigerators. Say like long back, they never had refrigerators. And when summer comes, you know that we feel like drinking only chilled water or some cold drink which can actually quench our thirst, right? So, right? That is during our period. But in olden days, how did these people used to quench their thirst in spite of no refrigerators? We know that they used to have matka, right? The earthen pot where they used to store water. Now, can you lift this earthen pot whose surface is oily? Imagine there is oil spread over the earthen pot and you try to lift it like this. Will you be able to lift it? Why? Because the surface of the pot becomes smoother, and as I've told you, when there is a smooth surface, the friction is less. So, there wouldn't be a grip between your palm and the pot to hold it properly. That's the reason it slips off your hand. And definitely it will break into pieces, and definitely your mama will come and give you nicely that you have broken a earthen pot, right? So, that is difficult. You cannot, and you see that if there was no friction between the board and the marker which I am writing, definitely I would not have written anything because everything will skip off, everything will slide off because there is no friction. You might be seeing this board to be very smooth, very smooth, but there are some irregularities which are present on the surface of the board, due to which I am able to write on the board using a marker. That means the force is used to interlock the things. To overcome this interlocking, the force is acting on it. That is nothing but friction. And you can see, it would be really funny, say like if there is no friction, what would be the condition? You would have seen that the rolling object keeps rolling. You can say all the time it keeps rolling. The sliding objects all the time keep sliding. And you see, you would never walk, you would always slip. Right? Yes or no? You would have always slipped off. If you remember, when I taught you about this contact force, especially friction, I told you we have special spikes under the sole of the shoe so that they provide a grip. And I also have explained you that the skin or the muscle which is present under our feet, the skin of our feet is little rough with uneven surface. the shape of the feet itself is uneven, due to which you won't slip when you walk. So by now you might have understood this friction very well. Right? Imagine what would have happened if there was no friction. So everyone would have slided down, or every one of us would have rolled down on the surface. Right? It would have been quite interesting, but unfortunately we have frictional force which will not allow us to do all these things. Right? And see, we've been discussing like these are the funny things where we can enjoy if there was no friction. But there are also few things which will definitely make us worry. Right? See, we know that we use many mechanical devices on our daily basis, right? Right from your day starts, you only depend upon the machines. Say like early in the morning, if your mother has to cook breakfast for you, if it is say like idli or dosa, what is that she is using? She uses a mixer grinder, right? And if she has to make a toast, you have a toaster, right? And if she has to cook the food and store it, if she is going out somewhere, if she has to cook the food and store it, where will she store? In the refrigerator. It is again a machine, right? The clothes which you are wearing, from where do they come? From industries. On what things the industries are run? They run on machines, right? The machines will help us to give the productivity of the industry. So, by now you might have understood that right from the beginning of the day till we sleep, we depend upon various machines. And these machines are provided with so many parts in it, where they get weared off, or wear and tear in parts of these machines is seen because of continuous friction, because of continuous rubbing of these objects against each other. So when they continuously rub against each other, they become so smooth that there is no more frictional force acting on it. Then they stop working. So if you have ever experienced this, I think most of you might have. When your mama runs the mixer grinder, which is of very old kind, right? Say like she might have used it for so many years, and when she puts a jar and switches it on, you get the trink sound, right? Very irritating sound, right? That irritating sound is nothing but because the blades of the jar and the blades which are present on the mixer grinder, they are not properly interlocked. There is no proper friction because they're where the property of this is lost. They are weared away. That is the reason there is a sound which has been produced, crinking sound which has been produced, and which is really irritating. I don't like it. Okay, so this sound, what does it make? That indicates that there is a wear and tear of the part of the machine. Okay, at the same time, when you see in big industries, huge industries and firms, machine keeps running continuously day and night, and one fine day they come for a repair. Why? Because the parts of the machine which are present, they get weared away. That is the rubbing of these machines continuously. The parts of the machines, when they get rubbed against each other, the frictional force is reduced. That's the reason they don't work. And sometimes we see the sounds which come out of the ceiling fans. That is because the bearings, what happens? They lose the friction because of the continuous movement. So, you might have seen, we felt that this friction is important for us, but at the same time, it is also leaving some bad effects. Like not bad effects, it's also an evil for us, right? So, not only this, when your mother uses a sewing machine, if she continuously uses the sewing machine, even one fine day it will stop. You might have seen that producing a sound, right? And you can also see the friction, which is actually, this friction can produce heat. How come? How come this friction can produce heat? You might be wondering, oh, what is she saying? How come friction will produce heat? Yes, I'll give you a small example, the best example to understand how friction can produce heat. Now, join both your hands like this and start rubbing this palms against each other for a few seconds. What do you feel? Right, you feel it warm, right? So what is this rubbing against each other? That means you are creating a friction between these two surfaces, due to which a heat is produced due to vigorous movement, right? In the same way, the machinery parts, as they run continuously, there is a vigorous movement between the machinery parts which are used in industries. So when they run vigorously, they not only get weared away, they also get heated up. See, when your refrigerator works continuously, we don't switch off refrigerators at home, right? Sometimes when you go touch the surface of the refrigerator, you feel it's hot. Why? Because they produce heat. So you might have observed this so many times in many cases, many of the electronic devices. Not only this, a charger which is plugged into the socket, after some time it becomes hot. So you have seen that every machine, when it works continuously, it will become hot. It will become hot or generates a lot of heat. So not only this small things, but many electronic devices run. Okay, not only machines, heavy machines, the small things like mixer grinders or your chargers or your, say like your stabilizers or your TV or your what do you call, refrigerator, they produce heat, and when they produce heat, there is a lot of wastage of energy which has been produced along with the heat. Right. So now let us see how this wastage of the heat can be minimized, how the wastage of the heat or wastage of the energy can be minimized. You can say like how can we minimize the friction which has been creating all these things, right? Like heat production and wear and tear away of the parts of the machinery, right? Now let us talk about how this friction can be reduced.